Hello and welcome to Special Dialogue with me, Siska Becker, only on TVRI World. For this edition, I have two very special guests with me. Ms. Tamila Tasheva, the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine to the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and Mr. Vadim Halaichuk, member of Ukrainian Parliament and co-chair of Crimean Platform. Ms. Tamila, Ms. Vadim, thank you so much for talking with me this evening. I truly appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you for the invitation.
Now, first of all, to give our viewers context and understanding of what you're doing right here in Indonesia, in Jakarta in particular, could you please tell us, what is the Crimea Platform?
Crimea Platform, it's an international mechanism for the occupation of Crimea Peninsula, which is occupied by Russian Federation in 2014, and where actually war in Ukraine, war Russia against Ukraine is started, and it's established in 2021 in inaugural summit of Crimea Platform in August in Kiev, and then even last year, even after full-scale invasion, we have a second summit of Crimea Platform, or summit on parliament level of Crimea Platform.
Okay. Now, as I understand, you explained to us previously in the press conference that you have been doing somewhat of a world tour, an international tour, to deliver the messages that the Crimea Platform would like to convey to the world. Could you tell us about the journey so far?
Actually, we always advocate issue of Crimea. We always say that war started 9 years ago with occupation of Crimea, and our main goal is the occupation all our territories, including Crimea Peninsula, of course, and Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, or newly captured, newly occupied territories from Russian Federation, which started 1 year ago. We work with different regions. But last year, at the end of the year, President Zelensky, he mentioned at his speech for our Ukrainian ambassadors that countries of Global South and Southeastern Asia in particular, and Indonesia, of course, it's one of our priorities for this year also, but not only, and we need more close cooperation on different levels, on political level, of course, economical level, and at humanitarian sphere, work with academia, and that is why we're here. We start from India. Vadim actually visited New Delhi, then I with my colleagues Maria Tomak, we joined him in Malaysia, and then we finally come here to Indonesia, to Jakarta, and we visit also Jakarta one day ago with another member of Ukrainian Parliament, Maria Mesentsova.
Okay, so you've had quite a journey, to say the least, from India and then to Southeast Asia, including Malaysia and Indonesia. What has been the response so far, Mr. Vadim?
The trip that we are now finishing today has been designed so that we, first of all, bring the information explaining what is really happening in Ukraine. Meet as many people as possible to discuss ways of cooperation, to explain what in reality is needed for this war to stop. We have very special assignment here, since unfortunately the Russian view or the Russian propaganda has been fairly successful in penetrating the information here, the media here, that Russia has been threatened by Ukraine and by the West, and therefore Russia had to react and start war. As a matter of fact, they don't even call it war, they call it the special military operation. So our goal is to tell the truth, and our goal is to get the support of international community because the only way to end this war would be to assist Ukraine in pushing the aggressor out of our country and then starting peace negotiations.
You mentioned that one thing that is complicating your mission, if I can say so, would probably how Russia has had a head start in its propaganda and holding the narrative about what is the reason behind this war and this aggression. And do you see this as the main challenge, and how is the Crimea platform is going to break this challenge of having the propaganda already so embedded in lots of people's minds?
Russia, by calling this the special military operation, has demonstrated what it meant when they created the strategy for a hybrid warfare, as they called it. And very important part of that strategy is the information warfare, where Russia takes these narratives and we have to admit quite masterfully pushes through complete lies, which are pretty difficult to understand if you don't have accurate information. However, with this open aggression, with this open invasion that Russia has conducted, people have become a lot more demanding, a lot more attentive to the details. And of course, you can find a lot of facts of Russian crimes committed in Ukraine. Of course, you have access to lots of evidence of that. You have also the decisions made by different international bodies, starting with the UN General Assembly, clearly stating what it is, that Russia has annexed illegally Crimea back in 2014. Then last year, it started this completely unprovoked open aggression against Ukraine. So people have this information, and our task is to actually come here, speak to as many people again as possible to understand what it is that may be not clear yet, which we could help people to understand better.
Mr. Vadim, Ms. Tamila, you have mentioned and stated before that one of the main reasons you are here is to tell the Indonesian people what is actually going on in Crimea. We're going to talk about that right after these messages. Please stay right here on Special Dialogue. Thank you for staying with us on Special Dialogue. I'm still with our special guest, Ms. Tamila Tasheva and Mr. Vadim Halaichuk, who's here on behalf of the Crimea platform. Now, Mr. Vadim and Ms. Tamila, you told us a lot about how the everyday life is right now in Crimea. Could you please tell us specifically, elaborately to our viewers, how is actually the day-to-day lives of Crimean people right now?
Actually, when Crimea is occupied, Russia starts to clean up all activities in Crimea. Yes, they killed Crimean activists, they banned Crimean Tatar Majlis, self-representative institution of Crimean Tatar people, they destroyed cultural heritage and do from Crimea a huge military base for offensive operation against Ukraine. Yes, and when Russia occupied Crimea, they start persecution Crimean Tatar and ethnic Ukrainians in Crimea. And if you say about daily life, it's an occupation, you know, it's an occupation when you live in territory of fear, because you do not know that you arrested at just today, that day, at morning or not. Do you have searches in your houses or not? Of course, they have schools, kindergartens, but it's always on the fear, you know. And they persecute a lot of unfortunately, Muslim community in Crimea. Now we have a lot of political prisoners who arrested by Russian occupation authorities. We have 180 political prisoners. 116 of them are Crimean Tatars, Muslims. And of course, all these people really need to support from Ukrainian government, but Ukraine don't have access for this territory. That is why we always call to our international partner, to UN, to Council of Europe, to European Court of Human Rights, to help for these people, because it's only way for survive for these people in prison or in Crimea.
Maybe lots of people in Indonesia, including our viewers, have very limited understanding and knowledge that there is actually native Crimeans who are Muslims, the Tatar community. How come we're only hearing about them now?
Because occupation started 9 years ago. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of cultural communication, yes, and ties between our countries, but it's really a window of opportunity to speak about national minorities and indigenous population of Ukraine, and we really need this solidarity. We have more than 700 years of Muslim culture, Islam in Crimea. We have all these mosques in Crimea, which is founded by Khan Uzbek or Egypt Khan Baybars, and he also built a mosque in Crimea. It's an old history of Crimea, and when Russian Federation say that Crimea is a territory of Russian war glory, it's not true. It's when some even Western partners say that Crimea is territory of Russia, it's not true. It's a land of Crimean Tatar indigenous people, and of course it's a land of Ukrainian people, because it's our international recognized border, 1991. It's the territory of Ukraine. If we respect international law, of course, we must to say it.
Yes. I would add to that maybe the reason why people didn't know much about Crimean Tatar people in Ukraine, because in Ukraine we all live peacefully. Ukrainians, Tatar people, many other peoples, over 100 as a matter of fact, peoples in Ukraine, the issues were resolved in a very peaceful manner. As a matter of fact, Crimea had a special status. It was an autonomous republic, had its own parliament, had its own government. Therefore, of course, the way that Russia approaches this issue of how to handle relationships with indigenous people has created this problem. The tradition in the Russian Empire was to oppress local people, oppress indigenous people, oppress people who had different religion, different languages, because it's easier to roll that way. It was okay for you to speak your own language, but at home, not at work officially. It's okay if you exercise different religious traditions, but you don't expect to be respected for that. Let's put it that way. So that's just the way the empires handle their colonies. That's the way they manage these relationships. So again, in Ukraine, for centuries, people of different faith, different religions, different languages have lived in peace. We didn't have the issue until Russia came.
To make us understand more about the plight of the Ukrainian Tatar community, could you tell us exactly what are they doing now to, survive from Russian oppression? And we could tell us more the reason, beside of differences in religion and also ethnicities and all kinds of backgrounds. Why are they being oppressed?
Well, Tamila has explained the history, the very complicated history of Russian Empire moving in, squeezing indigenous people out for many reasons. Tatars in Crimea have experienced effectively 3 deportation campaigns over the last 3 centuries, as a matter of fact. The policies are such that, as we discussed, it makes it easier for the empire to rule. And Crimean Tatars, it was their home for centuries. They had their own state. So for them, Crimea is dear. Crimea is the place where they lived, where their ancestors lived, and where they intend to live. So that's why Russians have attacked with such severity, and that's why Crimean Tatars opposed Russian occupation from the very beginning. And that was the main reason. Russians said, you either recognize our authority or else, and you know what else happened over the centuries with Crimean Tatars. That's the essence too.
Okay, Mr. Vadim, Ms. Tamila, we learned a lot about the historical and political significance of Crimea and also the plight of all Ukrainians with the ongoing oppression by Russia. Next, I would love to talk more about the relationship between the Ukrainian government and Indonesia. That's coming up next in the next segment. Please don't go anywhere. Special dialogue. We'll be right back. Back on Special Dialogue, I'm Siska Becker. I have been so fortunate to be able to spend some time here with Ms. Tamila Tasheva and Mr. Vadim Halaichuk on the last day of their 5 days tour of Indonesia. Once again, thank you so much for squeezing me in your tight schedule. I've been enlightened so far with our conversation, but I want to dive even deeper about your visit here, specifically in Indonesia. Could you tell us about the groups of people that you met and what do you think would be the expected result from all these meetings?
We really have a good program, and we appreciate for our embassy of Ukraine in Republic of Indonesia, and of course for all people which we have a meeting with these institutions. We have meetings with members of parliament, with state institutions, with Ministry of Justice, with human rights councils, with ombudsperson for Indonesia. We have a lot of meetings with Islamic organizations, with Ulama Majlis of Indonesia. And we have visits and even lectures in the academia sphere, and visit Yogyakarta and University of Muhammadiyah and Islamic University of Indonesia. And it's really very important to share our information and to learn, of course, also and get for our country experience how to live also and manage all issues with diversity, because you have a diverse country, we have a diverse country. Yes, you have a lot of religion which is really live or in peace on the one land, and we have also. And of course for Ukraine, very important to have this direct communication, not only via Zoom actually, yes, which we have somehow, but very important to direct messages and communicate with your society, with state institutions. And very also important to say that we really appreciate for political support on the level of UNGA for working for a resolution about territorial integrity of Ukraine from very beginning, from 2014. Of course, we need more support, even humanitarian support, for example, for people who now suffering in Crimea and in mainland of Ukraine, because it's dozens of missile attacks against civilian infrastructure, all our cities. And it's one of the reasons why we also come here to say about this support, to communicate and highlight information.
Okay, was there any positive outcomes of these conversations? You mentioned before that Indonesia and Ukraine has already have a bilateral relationship, but of course, after the full-scale invasion, the relationship decreased quite significantly. But now that you approach an open discussion again with groups of people in Indonesia, how do you think the relationship will be like from now on?
For me, as a member of parliament, it was, of course, very important that we have very good contacts with members of parliament here, both in the Ukrainian parliament and Indonesian parliament. So-called groups of friendships exist, and we've exchanged visits. And as a matter of fact, there were quite a few visits from our colleagues from Indonesia to Ukraine before the war started. These exchanges help a lot in terms of better understanding and building up the relationships that we have. The war conditions, of course, make it very difficult, if next to impossible to travel, but even under such conditions, we are trying to continue, and we appreciate very much the visit from the president of Indonesia last summer to come see with his own eyes what's happening in Ukraine and discuss the ways of assisting Ukraine with it. The meetings that we had in parliament and in some government institutions were also about the issues at hand. What needs to be done right now in order for Ukraine's economy, Ukraine's society to be able to withstand this ordeal? What needs to be done to defend, protect human rights, to protect Muslim people in Ukraine, to counter lies that Russia is spreading about the reality on the ground, and very importantly, what should the international society do to end this war and to bring the guilty to justice, so that we really see changes in the way how international institutions function, which in case of Ukraine, we all see clearly did not perform very well to prevent this from happening. So Indonesia, of course, is the largest in terms of Muslim population country in the world. It has a very, very loud word in the voice in the Muslim community, and in general in this region, as a very large country with very significant trade going with Ukraine, for example. It's also our good trade partners. Of course, the volumes of trade have fallen dramatically, but we also discussed the reasons for that and the problems that were created by Russia in the Black Sea region, with transports from Ukraine basically blocked, and grain from Ukraine not coming to the countries, including Indonesia, that badly needed. So all these issues were at hand when we held our discussions, and as I said, we had very positive, encouraging feedback, and we will have a follow-up, as we agreed, with bringing more people to this dialogue to exchange the opinions in different spheres.
Okay. So basically, a lot of diplomatic moves were done during this visit to strengthen the relationship between Indonesia and Ukraine. But of course, the situation is quite dire right now as we speak. People are suffering. Could you tell us what are actually the most urgently needed help by the people in Crimea and the whole of Ukraine, and how can Indonesia help, maybe in terms of humanitarian support and urgent supplies that could truly help the people in Crimea and whole of Ukraine?
We have discussed different ways of assistance, and Indonesia has been very helpful in providing some medical supplies, some other items for humanitarian assistance. We have particularly touched upon something very important for us right now, since Russia has deliberately targeted civilian infrastructure and electricity grid in Ukraine. We have a lot of destruction in that particular sphere. And since Indonesia has some systems and some of the equipment that is exactly of the class of the equipment that we use in Ukraine for that, we discussed different possible projects for cooperation for bringing that equipment, switches, transformators, which would help us to renew the electricity grid. So right now, the negotiations didn't start yet. We have spread the information on what it is that we need, and now awaiting some feedback, after which we hope we will quickly go into negotiating some very concrete projects on assisting Ukraine that way.
Hopefully this visit can be the kickstart of concrete results that could truly help the people in Crimea and Ukraine. Mr. Mila, Mr. Fadim, once again, thank you so much for this opportunity. On behalf of the whole crew, please let me extend my most sincere condolences to the loss of lives and devastation that is happening right now in Ukraine, and we wish you all the best in your journey in regaining independence in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you.
That's the end of our special dialogue. Thank you for watching. I'm Siska Becker, and I expect to see you in future events and, of course, future programs in special dialogue only on TVRI World. Thank you.